In the glittering world of Hollywood, fame often hides the deepest tragedies. Few stories capture this more hauntingly than the mysterious death of Natalie Wood. She wasn't just a movie star, she was an icon. Known for her unforgettable roles in West Side Story and Rebel Without a Cause, Natalie lived a life of glamour and acclaim. Yet on the night of November 28, 1981, everything changed. Aboard her yacht, the Splendor, anchored off Catalina Island, Natalie vanished into the darkness. By morning, her lifeless body was found floating in the cold Pacific waters. She was dressed in a flannel nightgown, socks, and a red down jacket. The world was stunned. The headlines screamed, "Accidental drowning." But from the very beginning, the details didn't add up. There were bruises on her arms, an abrasion on her cheek, and whispers of a heated argument just hours before she disappeared. On board with her that night were three men: her husband, Robert Wagner, actor Christopher Walken, and the yacht's captain, Dennis Davern. Their stories never fully matched. For decades, the case was labeled a tragic accident. But behind the official reports, investigators, journalists, and even family members continued to ask the same chilling question. Was Natalie Wood's death truly an accident, or was there something darker at play? And now, with new evidence and expert analysis, the mystery may finally have an answer. But as the truth emerges, it isn't good. Natalie Wood's story begins far from the glittering lights of Hollywood. Born Natalia Nikolaevna Zakharenko in 1938 to Russian immigrant parents, her family struggled to make ends meet in San Francisco. Yet even as a child, Natalie possessed something rare: a natural magnetism in front of the camera. By age 5, she had already appeared in her first film. And by 8, she became a household name after starring in the Christmas classic Miracle on 34th Street. Hollywood had discovered its next great child star. But for Natalie, fame was both a gift and a burden. From a young age, she was pressured to live up to the expectations of studio executives and a demanding mother who managed her career with an iron grip. The innocent child soon grew into a beautiful young actress, but inside, Natalie often felt trapped in roles designed more for public fantasy than personal fulfillment. By the 1950s, Natalie had successfully transitioned from child roles to adult stardom, appearing in cultural landmarks like Rebel Without a Cause, alongside James Dean. That film not only cemented her as a serious actress, but also revealed a different side of her: personality. Someone deeply sensitive, drawn to emotional intensity, and burdened by a constant fear of abandonment. Her performance earned her an Academy Award nomination, and Hollywood celebrated her transformation into a starlet of immense depth. Yet, behind the glamour, Natalie carried scars. Friends would later recall her lifelong fear of dark water, a phobia so intense she avoided swimming whenever possible. Ironically, this fear traced back to a chilling prophecy. A fortune teller once told her mother that Natalie would die in dark water. Whether coincidence or fate, this prediction haunted her for years. Despite the shadows, Natalie's professional life soared. In the 1960s, she starred in West Side Story and Splendor in the Grass, performances that solidified her as one of the most bankable stars of her generation. Critics admired her ability to portray vulnerability and strength simultaneously. Audiences adored her beauty, her grace, and her seemingly perfect life. But Hollywood perfection is often a carefully constructed illusion. Behind the camera, Natalie's personal life was far from stable. Her marriage to actor Robert Wagner, Hollywood's golden boy, fascinated the public. They were young, glamorous, and seemed like the perfect couple. But their relationship was marked by volatility. They first married in 1957, only to divorce 5 years later amid reports of jealousy and tension. Years later, fate reunited them. In 1972, Natalie and Robert remarried, presenting themselves once again as Hollywood's dream couple. To outsiders, it seemed like a fairy tale rekindling of love. But insiders whispered about heated arguments, Wagner's jealousy over Natalie's co-stars, and the strain of balancing family with demanding careers. By the late 1970s, Natalie was still a star, though her fame had slightly dimmed as Hollywood shifted its focus to younger talent. She longed to prove herself once again in meaningful roles, and in 1981 she was preparing for a comeback. She had signed on for new projects, and with her family life seemingly stable, 2 daughters at home, and a renewed marriage, Natalie appeared ready to embrace a new chapter. But this balance was fragile. Friends noticed underlying tensions between Natalie and Wagner. There were whispers of jealousy, especially when Natalie began working with younger actors like Christopher Walken. No one could have predicted that within weeks, Natalie Wood's life would end in a way eerily connected to her deepest fear. The stage was set for a tragedy that would shake Hollywood for decades to come. Thanksgiving weekend, November 1981. Natalie Wood and her husband, actor Robert Wagner, decided to spend the holiday on their yacht. Splendor anchored off Catalina Island. Along with them were 2 other men, Christopher Walken, Natalie's co-star in the film Brainstorm, and the yacht's captain, Dennis Davern. On the surface, it looked like a casual getaway, food, drinks, and conversation under the California night sky. But beneath that surface, tensions were brewing. Witnesses at the island's restaurant later recalled the group having dinner together that evening. Laughter filled the air, but it wasn't carefree. Some remembered the atmosphere as tense, the wine flowing a little too freely, and conversations edging into arguments. By the time they returned to the yacht, emotions were running high. Inside the splendor, alcohol continued to flow, and so did the friction. Accounts suggest that Wagner grew increasingly jealous of Walken, frustrated by the bond he seemed to share with Natalie. Heated words were exchanged, and according to Captain Davern's later testimony, voices grew louder, angrier. Davern would claim that Wagner smashed a wine bottle in rage, shattering the fragile peace of the night. From this point forward, the accounts of what happened next diverge. Walken retreated to his cabin, later insisting he had no knowledge of Natalie's disappearance until it was too late. Davern, however, maintained that a violent argument between Wagner and Natalie erupted on the yacht's deck. Then, silence. At some point during the night, Natalie vanished. The official report would later suggest she left the yacht, attempting to secure a small dinghy that had been tied to the side. Investigators initially concluded she slipped, fell into the water, and drowned. But the details never quite fit that explanation. Natalie's body was discovered hours later, floating face down in the cold Pacific waters, less than a mile from the yacht. She was wearing a flannel nightgown, socks, and a red down jacket, clothing that made no sense for someone supposedly trying to board a small dinghy. Even more troubling were the bruises found on her body, on her arms, legs, and face. While some could be explained by the impact of water or rocks, others appeared suspicious, as if from a struggle. The dinghy itself was later found washed up on shore. Strangely, it showed no clear signs of being used in a hurried escape. There was no evidence that Natalie had attempted to start its engine. It raised a haunting question. If she had truly been trying to leave the yacht, why was the dinghy in such a state? The timeline of her disappearance only deepened the mystery. Wagner claimed he noticed Natalie missing around midnight after searching the yacht and assuming she had gone to town. Yet he waited hours before alerting authorities. By the time the Coast Guard was contacted, it was already too late. When news of her death broke the next morning, Hollywood and the public were devastated. The official ruling, accidental drowning. But whispers circulated immediately. Friends who knew Natalie well insisted she would never have gone out alone at night, especially not near water, given her lifelong phobia. Others pointed to Wagner's shifting statements, which seemed to change with each retelling. What happened in those crucial hours on the Splendor remains one of Hollywood's most chilling mysteries. Was it truly a tragic accident, or was something more sinister at play that night? One thing was clear: the questions had only just begun. When Natalie Wood's death was officially ruled an accidental drowning in 1981, many believed the case was closed. But almost immediately, cracks began to appear in the story, cracks that only grew wider with time. The first problem was the conflicting accounts of what happened aboard the yacht that night. Robert Wagner told investigators that he and Natalie had argued, but only about trivial matters. He suggested she may have gone outside to secure the dinghy and, in the process, tragically fallen into the water, but his account changed slightly in later interviews. At times, he emphasized jealousy over Christopher Walken. At others, he downplayed the argument entirely, painting it as nothing more than a misunderstanding. Christopher Walken, on the other hand, maintained a stance of near silence. In rare comments, he claimed he knew little of what had transpired and that he had retreated to his cabin. To this day, Walken has avoided deep public discussion about the events, fueling speculation that he knows more than he admits. Then there was Dennis Davern, the yacht's captain. At first, he went along with the official narrative. But years later, his story changed dramatically. In multiple interviews and eventually in a book, Davern claimed that Wagner was enraged with jealousy, smashing a wine bottle and fighting with Natalie on the deck. According to him, Wagner deliberately delayed calling for help once Natalie disappeared. These claims painted a far darker picture than the tidy version investigators had presented. The physical evidence also raised troubling questions. Natalie's autopsy revealed bruises on her arms, legs, and face, marks that didn't fully align with a simple fall into the water. While the coroner initially explained them away as injuries sustained during her drowning, others argued they looked like signs of a struggle. Even the placement of her jacket and socks seemed inconsistent with the idea of her venturing out voluntarily. Despite these inconsistencies, the case was quickly closed. Los Angeles County authorities accepted the explanation of accidental drowning and moved on. For decades, that official conclusion stood, leaving Natalie's family and fans unsettled. But whispers never ceased. Friends of Natalie, including actress Jill St. John and others close to her, expressed doubts. They knew about her lifelong fear of dark water. They knew she wouldn't have chosen to leave the yacht in the middle of the night, especially in rough seas. For them, the accident explanation simply didn't fit. Public suspicion only deepened as Wagner continued to evade tough questions. He gave interviews in which he alternately expressed grief and frustration, but when pressed about the details of that night, his answers were evasive. To some, his reluctance looked like guilt. To others, it was simply the reaction of a man haunted by tragedy. As the years passed, investigators occasionally revisited the case. Each time, Wagner and his attorneys insisted there was no evidence of foul play. But Captain Davern's growing willingness to speak out and his insistence that the truth was being hidden kept the story alive. By the early 2000s, journalists and true crime investigators began digging deeper. Documentaries, books, and media reports reignited public interest, painting a picture of a flawed investigation and a potential cover-up. Why had police accepted the initial account so readily? Why hadn't the bruises been examined more critically? And why did it take hours for a missing person report to be filed? The inconsistencies piled up. The unanswered questions became louder. And by 2011, the case would finally be reopened. But reopening the file would uncover even more disturbing details and place Robert Wagner under a shadow that has never truly lifted. For 30 years, Natalie Wood's death was labeled a tragic accident, a star lost too soon to a cruel twist of fate. But in 2011, everything changed. After decades of whispers, conflicting stories, and growing public suspicion, the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department made a startling announcement. The case was being reopened. The catalyst was Dennis Davern, the yacht's captain, who finally went on record to say what he had long hinted. In television interviews and sworn statements, Davern claimed Robert Wagner had been furious on the night of Natalie's death, enraged by her closeness with Christopher Walken. According to him, Wagner and Natalie fought loudly, and soon after, the actress disappeared. Davern alleged Wagner delayed calling for help and discouraged a search until hours later, when it was far too late. The new investigation also revisited the autopsy. Forensic experts reviewed the bruises on Natalie's body, and what once had been dismissed as accidental now looked far more troubling. The coroner revised the official cause of death from accidental drowning to drowning and other undetermined factors. The word undetermined cast a long, ominous shadow. Investigators also focused on the dinghy found on shore. There was no sign Natalie had attempted to use it. The ignition was off, the rope tied, and her clothing, a nightgown, socks, and heavy jacket, made no sense for someone intending to leave voluntarily. Instead, the details suggested chaos, perhaps even an attempt to flee after a violent confrontation. By 2018, Robert Wagner himself was officially named a person of interest. Authorities stopped short of charging him, citing insufficient evidence. But the implication was clear. The husband, who had once been portrayed as a grieving widower, was now under a cloud of suspicion. Wagner denied wrongdoing, insisting Natalie's death was a horrible accident. Yet his shifting accounts and refusal to cooperate fully with investigators only deepened public doubt. Christopher Walken, meanwhile, finally spoke briefly. He maintained he had been in his cabin and knew little about what happened, repeating the same careful distance he had kept for decades. Whether out of loyalty, fear, or genuine ignorance, Walken's silence left a gap in the narrative that has never been filled. The reopened case reignited media attention. Documentaries, podcasts, and investigative specials dissected every detail, from the bruises on Natalie's arms to the smashed wine bottle on the yacht. Family members, including Natalie's sister Lana Wood, became outspoken, insisting there had been a cover-up and that Wagner knew far more than he ever admitted. And yet, despite years of renewed investigation, no definitive conclusion emerged. No one has ever been charged. The case remains officially unresolved. But for many, the truth is already painfully clear. Natalie Wood feared dark water her entire life. She told friends she would never venture out alone at night, never risk the ocean's black depths. To believe she calmly left the yacht to tie a dinghy stretches the imagination beyond reason. Her bruises, the arguments, the delayed search, all point to something more sinister. More than 40 years later, the mystery of Natalie Wood's death still grips Hollywood. Perhaps the full truth will never be known. Perhaps those last moments on the Splendor are destined to remain hidden in silence and darkness. But one reality cannot be ignored. The official story never matched the evidence. And if Natalie's final night reveals anything, it's that beneath Hollywood's golden glamour often lies a darkness that refuses to stay buried.